Loyal Imperial citizens, I'm Chief Librarian Tarek of the Wardens of the Webway chapter. I've been asked by my chapter master to collect the stories of the great heroes of the Imperium and record them for posterity. Our connection with the greater galaxy may have been lost with the fall of Cadia, but we still remain loyal. Some of the greatest legends of the Imperium come from the sons of the God Emperor of mankind, who fought at his side and unified much of the known galaxy, before half fell to the force that now strands us from the embrace of the Imperium. I would be a failure as a son, if I didn't first speak of my Ginsire Jaghatai Khan. Despite joining this new chapter of the stranded and forgotten, I am, and forever, will be a white scar. Jaghatai Khan, also known as the Great Khan, the Kogan and the Warhawk, was the Primarch of the 5th Legion of Space Marines, the White Scars, who led them through the years of the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy. Jaghatai fought alongside his White Scars for another 70 standard years following the end of the heresy, eventually disappearing in 084.M31 into a region of space known as the Maelstrom, a large warp reef in the Ultima Segmentum that is a smaller counterpart of the Eye of Terror. Jaghatai is believed to have been in pursuit of the Drukhari, who had savaged his homeworld of Kogaris, following the Battle of Carousel V, with his first brotherhood, when he went through a warp gate into the Drukhari portion of the Webway. Jaghatai had been in pursuit of a mighty Drukhari lord, likely the Archon of the Drukhari Cable, that had attacked Carousel V and perhaps even Kogaris itself. Jaghatai Khan has not been seen since, though the White Scars believe he is still alive somewhere within the Webway and will one day return to the chapter in a time of great need. As a result of their Primarch's disappearance, the White Scars hold a particularly savage grudge against the Drukhari and will gladly seek out any opportunity to make war upon those savage and terrifying Xenos. Before I speak more of his greater history, I feel that I must share one of his famous quotes that all White Scars still learn to this day. Warriors of Kogaris, brothers of the great tribe, the Starhand calls you, do you not hear it? The battle's red edge is your home, the respect of your kinsman, your hearth. Plunge into the enemy's breast like a blade, cut out his heart, and you will know fulfillment. The Emperor has given us strength. In return we give him victory. Jaghatai Khan, the last charge of Galatama. It is said that after being mysteriously transported from Terra through the warp in his gestation capsule by the ruinous powers of chaos, Khan landed on a planet in the Segmentum Pacificus, named by the Imperium Mundus Planus, or as the native population called it, Kogaris. It was a fertile world with wide, open, green plains and tall, white mountains and blue seas. At the time of the Great Crusade, the Chogorian people had managed to restore their technological level in the wake of the Age of Strife to one similar to the pike and shot level of the late Renaissance on Old Earth. The dominant empire was a well-organized feudal aristocracy which had conquered most of the planet with well-equipped and highly disciplined armies, maintaining plate-armored horsemen and tight blocks of pike and arquebus-armed infantry. Their leader was the Palatine, and he won all of his battles with this great army. To the west of the Palatine's empire was the Empty Quarter, a barren grassland with few resources, and as such it was never invaded by the Palatine's armies. It was home to wandering tribes of vicious, nomadic horsemen and pastoralists, who fought each other for their ancestral lands. The Palatine or other nobles of his empire would sometimes lead forces into the Empty Quarter to capture slaves or merely to hunt the tribesmen for fun. Jaghatai's legacy began in the Empty Quarter. He was found by Ong Khan, the chieftain or Khan of a small tribe called the Tulaskas, who saw the young Primarch as a gift from the gods. It is said he had a fire in his eyes, the sign of a great warrior among the nomads. He was hated by the other tribes because of his ability to see beyond the constant warfare on the steppes to a vision of unity for all the downtrodden peoples of the Empty Quarter. Legends recount that the most influential moment in Jaghatai's life was the slaying of his adopted father by the rival Koroit tribe. Jaghatai, even as a young child, was the greatest warrior of the tribe and gathered Tulasker troops to avenge the death of his father. They moved on the Koroit tribe and razed its yurts to the ground, slaying every man, woman and child in a murderous, revenge-driven frenzy. Kon took the head of the enemy tribe leader and mounted it on his tent. This is what shaped him into a man of fierce honor, loyalty, and ruthlessness. From then on, he swore to end the constant tribal infighting, unite all the people of the empty quarter and bring an end to the practice of brother fighting brother. Kon fought hundreds of battles against other tribes and defeated hunting packs of nobles sent by the Palatine. Each tribe the Tulaskers conquered was absorbed into the larger Tulasker Confederacy, and Jaghatai made military service mandatory, while splitting tribes up and merging them with others, to remove and ameliorate tribal differences and long-standing blood feuds. His warriors were fiercely loyal, and Jaghatai was promoted from the ranks based on merit and ability. 10 summers after his arrival on Kogaris, as his tribe moved to their winter settlements, the Primarch traveled on a mountainside with a group of his followers. A vast avalanche pushed him and his group back down the mountain, killing the ordinary men. Jaghatai survived, but could not return to the mountain before the tribe moved on. Kon was caught by one of the Palatine's aristocratic hunting bands, led by the son of that emperor. All that returned of that band was one mutilated rider, with the head of the son of the Palatine, and a note saying that the people of the steppes were no longer his toys. When the snows cleared that year, an enraged Palatine gathered a massive army and was determined to march west to wipe the tribes of the empty quarter from the face of the planet. However, he underestimated Kon's power and ability and brought his highly disciplined army of heavily armored warriors and arquebusiers. This proved his downfall, as they could not catch the lightly armored Tulasker tribesmen. The constant rain of arrows from the tribesmen took its toll on the tight ranks of the Palatine's warriors. Eventually, the tribesmen defeated the army of the Palatine, who escaped back to his capital with a select few bodyguards. The rest of his army was slaughtered, almost to the last man. After the battle, all the tribal elders of the empty quarter gathered and announced that Jaghatai Kon was now the Kogan, the Kon of Khons of the empty quarter, the rightful ruler of all its people. The Kogan began the long process of conquering the rest of the planet, which possessed only one continent. During this momentous time, Jaghatai would meet several lifelong comrades, including Tagatai Yusujai, Chin Xi, and Hasek, all of whom would fight alongside the Primarch during their conquest of Kogaris. It would eventually go on to serve the Kogan for many Terran centuries to come. Jaghatai gave those cities of the Palatine he besieged 2 choices: surrender or die. Most surrendered, but many resisted and were destroyed, utterly wiped from the face of the planet. Eventually, the armies of Jaghatai came to the palace of the Palatine, where the Primarch demanded the head of the Palatine on a spike. His request was obliged by the capital city's population, which turned on their ruler to save their lives from the fierce tribesmen of the empty quarter. Jaghatai Kon adorned his tent with the head of his greatest conquest, just as he had with his first enemy 2 solar decades before. In only 20 standard years, Jaghatai Kon had conquered the largest empire in his world's history. He now had the problems of ruling that empire, not something he had initially expected. His nomadic people had no wish to rule these new, settled lands, only to carry on living in their old ways. The Tulasker people dispersed back to a tribal existence, and Kon ruled over them all with his generals by his side. As the ruler of his world, Jaghatai ended the wars that had wrecked Kogaris, keeping the peace with the threat of utter ruin for those who transgress his simple laws. What the Kogan might have created in isolation from the embers of civilization on Kogaris will never be known, for a short while after his ascension to the throne, the Emperor of Mankind arrived to change his destiny forever. Jaghatai's campaign of global conquest ended less than 6 solar months before the Emperor came to Kogharis in 865-M30 as part of his Great Crusade. Ironically, despite their role as pathfinders and discoverers, it was not a pioneer company of the 5th Legion that would discover lost Kogharis, but instead a fleet of the Lunar Wolves Legion, accompanied by Horus and the Emperor. On that long isolated world, Jaghatai had prospered, binding together the fractured tribes of the hinterlands to conquer empires and subjugate the entire world to his will. It was an achievement to rival any of his brother Primarchs in their founding years, and the Emperor hailed him as a true son and inheritor of the legacy he had prepared for him. The Great Khan, himself a builder of empires, was handed a destiny that saw him resign to the role of servant and not master, bound to the ambitions of the Emperor. Such abasement did not come quickly to such a conqueror as he, one who had slain kings and tyrants across the breadth of Kogharis, but still, the Great Khan knelt before this Emperor. Most historical accounts indicate that Jaghatai was overawed by the Emperor of Mankind and submitted without question, but his journals and writings show a more pragmatic reasoning behind the submission. Jaghatai, who had struggled long with the disunity of his adopted people, saw the benefits of the Imperium and the Emperor's secular doctrine of the imperial truth. In the ranks of the Lunar Wolves, he witnessed the dire cost of opposition. It was the same choice he had once offered to the tribes and cities of Kogharis, and even when it was cloaked in pomp and ceremony, the Khan of Khans understood what the Emperor's offer meant: to live as his vassal or perish as his rival. So the Khagan bargained for his loyalty and that of those he ruled, taking from the Emperor those guarantees he deemed fair regarding the treatment of the people of Kogharis and his role in the future empire. He would fight once again for unity and in secret revealed in the new challenge before him, at last able to slip the bonds of duty that had kept him busy with the mundane realities of governorship on Kogharis. Despite having already mastered the strategies of conquest in his own war against the petty empires of Kogharis, Jaghatai Khan was unfamiliar with the advanced weapons and war engines of the Imperium. With fighting across the galaxy reaching a fevered intensity, the forces of the Emperor couldn't spare any Primarch for lengthy training in the etiquette of the Terran court or the intricacies of imperial history. All were needed upon the front lines as the expanding Imperium began to encounter more and more powerful Xenos realms and fallen kingdoms of mankind hidden in the dark void. The conquest of Kogharis was, in the eyes of the Emperor and many of the Primarchs, more than proof of Jaghatai's skill at war. Indeed, of all of his new brother Primarchs, only Robot Guilliman and Rogel Dawn objected to the all-too-brief period of induction that Jaghatai received. Both felt that to leave the new Primarch bereft of a true understanding of the Imperium's foundation and culture would leave him ill-prepared to integrate properly with its factions and politics. Despite these objections, whose foresight was to prove unfortunate, the full authority of Legion Master of the 5th Legion was invested in Jaghatai, known among his brothers as the Khan and among his own as the Khagan, the Khan of Khans. Such a title, Master of the 5th Legion, held little meaning at that time in history, for the 5th was scattered to the far corners of the galaxy, absorbed in 1,000 separate wars. He was master of a legion of vagabonds, a situation that might have sat less well with others of his brethren, but was a challenge well suited to the Great Khan's talents and history. Just as he had on the vast plains of Kogharis, the Great Khan sought to build a conquering army from insular nomadic bands, and he began in the same fashion. Recruiting from among those of his Chogorian comrades that were of an age to undergo the arduous transformative surgery and be reborn as Space Marines, the Great Khan formed a new corps of warriors for his legion. At the same time, he dispatched a grand summons, calling upon all of the disparate bands of the 5th Legion, the scattered pioneer companies that warred across the galaxy, to attend him. Proclaimed by an astropathic signal and courier ship, Jaghatai's call would take many years to reach the furthest of his warriors. After his discovery, in 865 M30, the Kogan would wait for nearly a solar decade for the majority of the pioneer companies to assemble at Kogaris, the most isolated or heavily engaged still out of contact even as late as the start of the 31st millennium. The force that finally assembled in the skies above Kogaris, in those early years of Jaghatai's command, was not a unified legion. Each company kept to their own, looking on those who should have been their brothers, with suspicion and no little disdain, a gathering of strangers in a strange land. When the Kogan brought them all together on the wide plains of the empty quarter, he beheld 1,000 different heraldries on warriors of 100 different worlds, bound together only by the tenuous strands of their shared genetic legacy. The Khan of Khans wedded those genetic ties to the culture of Kogaris, making this the glue to unify his legion. Through the rituals and traditions of the Chogorian hill tribes, they became the White Scars that day, their loyalty to the Kogan and each other secured by the trials of blood and pain they had undergone and the oaths they had sworn. The gathering on Kogaris saw the first occurrence of a ritual that would grant the 5th Legion its new title, the White Scars, and seal its bond as a unified host. Adapted from the traditions of the Chogorian steppe tribes, the blooding, also known as the Ascension, is a simple ritual, dispensing with much of the shamanistic pageantry of the original. It was comprises of 2 parts, a cut and a name. On the open fields of the empty quarter that day, more than 50,000 warriors took up blades, in forms beyond count, and cut a mark upon the flesh of their own faces, each gauging the depth and pattern of the wound to mark their loyalty. The scars inflicted as part of the ritual vary in size, shape and placement, and among the original tribesmen of Kogaris, this would serve to mark out different tribes and bloodlines, though among those not born of Kogaris, the significance was less important. Among later generations of the Legion, certain patterns of scoring began to identify separate brotherhoods within the Legion, but such patterns did not begin to emerge until the last few decades of the 30th millennium. The second part of the ritual, conducted on that first day with the blood of the scoring still bright on the first White Scar's skin, was to choose new names to represent their new lives as part of the Order of Jaghatai, as warriors of the White Scars, discarding the lives that had gone before. Such symbolism was fairly common among the various warrior societies that made up much of the early Imperium's vast armies, with many of the Space Marine legions employing similar trials for their recruits. Such ceremonies have been employed for centuries as tools to enforce solidarity and loyalty among the most brutal of warrior societies, those tasked with the most onerous of duties and the harshest of sacrifices. On Kogaris, such rituals had held the tribes together through centuries of murder raids and slave hunts, and Jaghatai knew well its power to harden the soul and bind warriors together. The names themselves were symbolic, and no strict pattern has ever been enforced on newly marked White Scars. That first generation on the fields of Kogaris named themselves for their deeds, while later levies of the Legion chose names from the world of Kogaris in honor of their Primarch. The Khan of Khans gave them more than scars, encouraging the study of the noble pursuits, as they were known on Kogaris, such things as calligraphy, hunting, and the telling of ancient tales. He made the ways of Kogaris, the truth of his legion, a strange blend of practicality and superstition that was ill at ease with the strict tenets of the imperial truth, which denied any and all brands of religion. Jaghatai's refusal, in later years, to amend the practices of his legion to more closely fit the imperial truth, were yet another source of conflict between the Great Khan and some of his brothers, notably Logger and Robot Guilliman. The invasion of the Kolan Circle was but the first part of the Kogan strategy, for tradition alone would not suffice. In the wake of the games and ceremonies conducted on Kogaris, he led the combined ranks of the newly christened White Scars on campaign, the first battles they had fought as a unified host since leaving Terra. The Koghan chose the lawless worlds of the Kholan Circle for his initiation campaign. This region of space had been scouted several solar decades before by the 103rd Pioneer Company, the Soul Hunters, and was found to be teeming with wild outposts of renegade strains of mankind and roaming Xenos hosts. On each of the dozens of feral and hellish worlds that made up the circle, a long and vicious struggle awaited the White Scars, with few obvious gains in terms of strategic resource or value. However, the Koghan had chosen this battleground and his strategy with care. He set his legion against enemies that could not be overcome by any one company alone. Only by working as one legion would they prevail. He dispersed the Kashyyyk he had raised from Kogaris, the core of his new White Scars, throughout the various companies, warriors, whose names would only grow with the passing of years, Chin Xay, Jaghatai Yusujai, Hasek Noenkon, and others besides. These warriors he trusted to spread his teaching and to lead by example, to stand as his champions among the 5th Legion as it went to war in his name. Of the 80,000 warriors that they led into the fighting, 1 in 10 would perish in the 5 Terran years of struggle to cleanse the circle, a baptism of fire and blood that sealed the bonds between the survivors stronger than any simple oath. The Orcish hordes of Sangama and Vorgist were cut to pieces in a series of hit-and-run campaigns that bore the telltale hallmarks of the Chogorian Plains tribes' tactics. Severely outnumbered by their foe, these tactics, intimately familiar to the Chogorian initiates of Jaghatai's inner circle, were best suited to make the most of the White Scars' native ferocity and warhorn skills. Those companies assigned to the deepest systems of the circle fought alone and unsupported for almost 3 Terran years before the remainder of the Legion secured the outer regions. Here the Longhorn survival skills of the Pioneer Companies were put to the test, wedded to the Chogorian recruits' savagery and talent with a blade. Where other legions might have faltered or fallen back to regroup, losing the momentum of victory, these rugged warriors thrived, taking heart from the presence of their new lord. In every battle in which he fought, Jaghatai led the assault. At first, the legion simply followed him into the maelstrom, but as tales of the Primarch's wild valor and consummate skill spread among the warriors of the 5th Legion, they soon began to compete to fight by his side. It was his example that stood as their banner throughout the conflict, and it was to the Koghan and each other whom they were bound, not to the distant dream of the Imperium or any one of its worlds, but only to the Khon of Khons and the savage joy he took in war and in life. In those turbulent times, such things were considered of little note, for none would countenance the idea that a Primarch sworn to the Emperor would or could ever forsake his vows, and, as such, absolute loyalty to the Khon was considered the same as absolute loyalty to the Imperium. With the final battle for the Kholan Circle fought and won upon the desolate ashfields of Kholan itself, the many inhabited worlds fell into the Great Khan's hands. Those worlds had served to bind his legion together in blood and war, and now they would serve to rebuild it. From the wide plains of Kogaris, the rugged wastes of Kholan and Old Earth's many recruitment camps, the Koghan replenished the ranks of the Legion, and the White Scars emerged from the Kholan Circle campaign, a legion reborn. No longer were they a shadow that haunted the fringes of the Great Crusade. The Great Khan had brought them into the light, and he intended the First Blooding to stand at the forefront of the Emperor's Great Crusade, shoulder to shoulder with the other legions. The 5th Legion returned to the Great Crusade, not as the pioneer companies of old, but as the White Scars, united as a true legion. This was the Great Crusade's apex of glory, the last century of the 30th millennium. The nascent Imperium had pushed its borders to the very edges of the galaxy and thrown down the dragons that lurked at the margins of its ancient star charts. Now it grappled with those who would challenge its supremacy. Many terrible hosts and foul empires sought to lay claim to what was the rightful domain of mankind and the Emperor, and it fell to the legions Astartes to break them utterly. The White Scars were to number among the heroes of this age, spreading across the stars to bring war and death in the name of their new master. Though they lacked the numbers of some of their brother legions, they were unmatched in the sheer impetuous fervor with which they made war. These were heady days, full of fire and conquest, the wild rush of unceasing war against enemies too numerous to count. Where other legions sought to prosecute a war of stern discipline and careful planning, conquering with implacable might and securing those domains they seized, the White Scars descended upon the foe like a storm from clear skies. Where the enemy was weak or exposed, they enveloped and overran its positions without mercy, using speed and fury to overwhelm any defense. Where it was strong or well emplaced, they harried the enemy where it was weak, leaving it vulnerable to the legions that followed the trail of destruction they wrought. Many tales of their exploits speak equally of their ferocious skill at arms and the strategic insight of their commanders, different in style to that of other legions, wilder and more direct, but no less effective. Some considered them little more than barbaric reavers, akin to the wild butchers of Angron's World Eaters Legion or the executioners of Leman Russ Space Wolves, but the records of their campaigns suggest otherwise. They were pathfinders, in both a tactical and strategic sense, amongst the keenest and most proficient breed of the legions Astartes, created by the Emperor. Exhaustive plans and interminable preparations were not their ways, often leaving them at odds with more deliberate warriors like the sons of Rogel Dawn or Robot Guilliman. Yet they valued learning and knowledge highly, many among them skilled as artificers, philosophers, and artists. They gathered wisdom as other legions gathered weapons, to be kept at the ready until the time came to unleash them upon the foe. They were the wind, everywhere and nowhere, insubstantial and yet forceful, and they took to the duty they were given with a passion, taking joy from the thrill of battle and the hunt across the stars. As Sanguinius is recorded to have once said of the reborn 5th Legion, they smile often and they laugh when they kill. Unlike the brutal sons of Angron, or the wild wolves of Fenris, the White Scars did not lack discipline, and though they wore the cloak of the savage, they were not the same wild killers as those more infamous of their king. Their nature was untamed, but still bound by the chains of duty and honor as defined by the Chogorian code. They were merciless and sometimes cruel on the attack and often seen as insolent or fractious, but such rumors were founded on misunderstanding. When the White Scars granted no mercy to their foe, they did so not for the joy of simple slaughter, but in honor of the valor shown to them. They held back nothing just as had a worthy foe. When they failed to respect the policies and plans of others, it was because their own ways served them better. Rarely did they make counter-accusations of their own, allowing the results they garnered to speak for the rightness of their actions. They valued courtesy and forthright honesty over protocol and rigid adherence to rules ill-suited for the battlefield. Still, they did not fail to punish those who transgressed the rules they set themselves. Yet, despite these qualities, they were often seen as the least among their king, followers, and not lords, a fact that sat ill with warriors of such skill and dedication. For much of the Great Crusade, they remained outsiders to most of their brethren. Few among the other Primarchs sought the company of Jaghatai Khan and his sons, and Jaghatai did little to encourage them. Some found the strategies by which his legion fought to be flawed, especially the inflexible sons of Dawn and Guilliman, while others looked down upon the trapping of Chogorian tradition that bound the legion together. The Khan of Khans did little to dispel his reputation as a crude barbarian and wanton killer, keeping his own counsel and the company of those who cared to see past the veil of rumor that hid the true character of his legion. Of all of his brothers, the Khoghan found common cause with but a handful. Of these the closest was Magnus the Red of Prospero, for he was also an outcast in the small society of their peers and a man of integrity and brass honesty. Those few records of the two often note this friendship between two otherwise isolated primarchs. Horus, who appreciated talent above appearances, also showed some favor to the Khoghan, as did Sanguinius, who had been a statesman and diplomat among his often quarrelsome brothers. Of the others there is little recorded, possibly as there were few occasions where the primarchs gathered in numbers and fewer still where the Khoghan was present. Jaghatai Khan was ever to be found on the move, always where he was least expected and always at that critical locus that would decide the fate of battles and empires. Yet, as the Great Crusade moved into its final throes in the first years of the 31st millennium, the White Scars found themselves called upon less and less. The Emperor's Great Crusade had eclipsed its major rivals and charted most of the fractured and changed galaxy. Where, at the beginning of the long war, the maps had been blank and the enemies unknown and terrifying, they were now replete and mankind's enemies, largely known and cowed. In these final years of the conquest there were fewer wild spaces for the White Scars to make war as they liked. They were becoming obsolete, unnecessary to the empire that was to be. The Khan of Khans knew it and it made him restless. The chance to run ahead of the storm, to exult in the unknown and the sheer joy of the destruction that follows was fading, leaving only the dull work of governance. Things were becoming ordered and known, the Imperium was winning, and in a final victory, the White Scars would be undone. The Khan could sense that a choice was coming, a grand choice. They would be given the chance to be again what they had once been, but in doing so they would need to betray all that they had fought for. The other choice, no less invidious, was to remain true to their oaths and bound to a slow diminishment. By the latter years of the 800s.M30, the 5th Legion had earned itself a reputation for the types of operation for which it would later become most well known, but not all of its wars were fought in isolation. At Terrell 3, Jaghatai and Talakan B3, the Legion fought noted campaigns as part of Combined Legions Astartes expeditionary forces, and at Akko took its place in the line with the Blood Angels, Ultramarines, Salamanders and Emperor's Children legions. Indeed, the battle honor Akko would be borne on the banners of all 5 legions, including the treacherous sons of Fulgrim, throughout the Horus heresy and well into the latter age of the Great Scouring. Another battle honor, born with pride long after the outbreak of the Horus heresy by loyalists and traitor alike, was that won at Drun, in 881-M30, a lonely, arid world spinward of the Morpheus Rift. At Drun, the greater part of 3 entire legions stood together, each headed by their Primarch. The imperial compliance of a world that had once been a beacon of civilization was to be a crowning glory to an otherwise fruitless expedition, and so the Primarchs of all 3 legions present, the Lunar Wolves, the Death Guard and the White Scars, determined to deliver the imperial truth in person. 3 entire legions made planetfall as one, but what transpired when they came to stand before the gates of the world's capital was quite unprecedented in the decades of the Great Crusade. Those gates remained barred, and no reaction to the massing of 3 legions before them was forthcoming. Horus raised his mace to strike the mighty gates, but before he could do so, a word of caution rang out from the throng of counselors and attendants. The warning had been voiced by Kulek-sen, a senior stormseer of the 5th Legion. The shadow hangs over this place. The shadow of domination. Only death will sever the strings. Mortarion counseled Horus to press onwards, discounting the stormseer's warning, and press onwards Horus did, striking the gates such a resounding blow with his mace that it caused them to buckle inwards and collapse with a billowing cloud of dust. Advancing within the city, a great mass of humanity pressed in from every quarter. The eyes of the occupants were unfocused and vacant, every mouth slack and drooling. Everybody was unwashed and stinking and clad in shredded rags, as if the wearer had given no thought to their own bodily well-being for many solar months, perhaps even years. Once more, Kulek Sen offered his master his warning as the party moved through the streets, this time with increasingly strident concern. Once more, Mortarion heard and sneered at his derision of the Psyker's arts, but this time, the Great Khan interjected, insisting that his brother Horus heed the Stormseer's words. This time, Horus did so. Whatever it was that the Stormseer had detected an echo of before the gates was now evident for all to see. In the heavens above, a churning vortex of unnatural energies was forming, its eye directly above the center of the city. Etheric gusts caught the Primarch's personal banners, and the massed bodies finally stirred, a deep, sonorous groan voiced simultaneously from 100,000 throats. Fighting their way clear, the Primarchs reunited with their Jinsans outside of the city, and in council with the Great Khan's Stormseers, they determined that the entire world was under some manner of Xenos domination, one born, not of physical reality, but of the other realm of the warp. Worse still, they counseled that this domination was being exerted upon the human population of Drun via a series of extra-dimensional portals, each centered upon one of the major Mesotop cities. Only by closing these portals, the Stormseers claimed, would the enslavement of Drun be ended. And so the war to deliver Drun from the yoke of alien domination began. Jaghatai Khan was nominated by Horus as campaign commander. Such a thing was rare indeed, for even though the Emperor's Jinsans fought beneath the same banner and the sundering of their ranks was still many solar decades away, there existed a deep-seated rivalry between many. The wisdom of the Lupercal's decision was plain to see, but the Primarch of the Death Guard Legion protested it nonetheless, for Mortarion detested the employment of Psykers in any form, for any reason and against any foe. Thus the Death Guard served in the Drun campaign only nominally, under the Great Khan's leadership, Mortarion ensuring they remained apart from the other two legions. The war for Drun would rage for almost 6 Terran months, the Great Khan utilizing each element of his command as best suited its nature. Jaghatai's own legion ranged far and wide across the wastes of Drun, striking at concentrations of Xenos power identified by his Stormseers. They encountered a range of horrifying creatures, of barely definable form, though all had in common bloated bodies that floated on invisible etheric tides, multiple eyes, thrashing tendrils, and the ability to unleash fearsome blasts of warp energy, even as they directed wave after wave of subhuman mind slaves at the legionaries. The Stormseers proved crucial not just in locating these abominable foes, but in combating them on the field of battle too, for they were able to deaden the psychic domination effect and thus allow their brother legionaries to engage the Xenos puppet masters and defeat them, albeit not without loss. At the last, the campaign reached its climax where it had begun, at the Mesotop city, where the three Primarchs had first encountered the Xenos dominators. The closer to the heart of the city the Primarchs advanced, the more potent the psionic waves assaulting them grew, and the more massive and hideous the Xenos abominations they encountered. Though a potent force indeed, none can say what harm might have befallen the Primarchs had the White Scars Stormseers not been close at hand to repel the worst of the aliens' psychic counterassaults. The air itself screamed in torture as the very staff of reality was stretched to breaking point, the unlight of the warp glimmering through a million cracks and rents. Jaghatai, Horus and Mortarion knew that they had reached the center of the Xenos incursion, when even they could proceed no further, so powerful were the psionic tides flooding out from the hideously pulsating wound, in reality, at the very center of the city. Overhead loomed an archway of the quivering, still living flesh of what must surely have once been a man. Beneath the archway was a void pulsing with the raw power of the warp, and from it was emerging a vast and bloated form, a distended central sac replete with thrashing pseudopods and dozens of two-knowing eyes. Voicing an ancient Chogorian curse, the Great Khan swore the behemoth would not establish dominion in his Gene Father's realm, and in answer, his brothers took their place on either side, while what remained of his depleted Stormseer Council formed a loose ring all about. Every last iota of their power bent to the task of warding off the behemoth's vile king. Scholars of war might ponder what force might test the powers not just of one, but of three of the Emperor's sons, and in the contest that ensued, they might find one such possible answer. The behemoth brought to bear an array of weaponry, from whipping, diamond-sharp tentacles, to the unrelenting power of its utterly alien will. 10 Stormseers lay dead upon the ground in as many seconds, their minds torn apart by the behemoth's battering ram of psionic domination. The Primarchs were sorely tested, for while such as they could scarcely know fear, each soon bore a dozen and more wounds. Even the mighty Horus felt the behemoth's mental whip, and though he repelled its will, the effort left blood gushing from his eyes in crimson rivers. Mortarion too struggled against this vile foe, and while his scythe cut through its threshing tentacles by the dozen, it strove to gain dominion over his mind and to become master of his flesh. As with Horus, the behemoth was unable to batter down Mortarion's defenses, but resisting it drove the Death Lord to his very knees. It was Jaghatai Khan who at last put an end to the Xenos beast. By the combined efforts of his last remaining Stormseers, the Great Khan was rendered unseen to the behemoth, so that even as it concentrated its assault upon Horus and Mortarion, Jaghatai was able to work his way around the creature's vast, bloated form and thereby locate a weak point upon its underside. Many Imperial savants now wonder how different later ages might have been had only Jaghatai stayed his final strike, or but delayed it long enough for the behemoth to press its assault upon his brothers. Such ponderings are of course futile, and they ignore his essential nature. Jaghatai thrusts upwards, spearing some essential nodes, or organs, in the behemoth's central mass. It died upon his blade, but the explosion of etheric force unleashed was very nearly his end too. It was Horus who saved Jaghatai from being sucked into the now collapsing vortex, Lupercal hauling his brother clear. And thus was the emancipation of Drun achieved, though not a single one of the world's populace would benefit from the defeat of their alien masters. With the behemoth slain, and the warp portals through which the aliens had exerted their domination sealed, hundreds of millions of meat puppets collapsed wherever they were standing, never to rise again. In truth, such a fate was a mercy for the people of Drun and for the Imperium, for one way or another, they could not have been allowed to live. Jaghatai's closest relationships with his brother Primarchs were with Horus Lupercal of the vaunted Lunar Wolves Legion and Magnus, the Rat of the Thousand Suns. With Horus, the Khan shared a love of the rapid assault and felt understood and accepted by Horus. This understanding was also only truly shared by Magnus, who, like the Khan, was as much an outsider to the other Primarchs as Jaghatai. The close relationship of the White Scars Primarch to these two brothers was matched somewhat by the relationships between their respective legions. Several White Scars brotherhoods, companies, would often be seconded to fight alongside their cousins from the Lunar Wolves. These brotherhoods would utilize a mix of 5th and 16th Legion tactics, including the latter's more consolidatory approach to rapid warfare and the more standardized manner of the Lunar Wolves' military hierarchy. However, for some Kogorians these tactics could be difficult to understand. Similarly, the Thousand Suns were also known to be close to the 5th Legion for many reasons. The love of knowledge of the Sons of Prospero, their enjoyment in the subtleties of the universe and each legion's detachment from the rest of the Imperium would render a fruitful relationship between these two forces of Astartes. In stark contrast, the 5th Legion seemed to have a very poor relationship with many of the other Space Marine legions, most of all with the Death Guard and their equally mysterious Primarch Mortarion. It was also known that the White Scars did not get along well with the Space Wolves Legion. All legions had reputations, and some of these overlapped. The Space Wolves were known to boast of theirs as the Emperor's executioners. When the White Scars fought alongside other Imperial forces, they were often unfairly judged due to their use of ritual tribal marks and scars. People automatically assumed that they were savages, and were no better than the barbarous warriors of Leman Russ that hailed from the death world of Fenris. The White Scars did not wish to be seen as savages, for they constantly strove to achieve the most noble of human pursuits. In addition, the comparison added salt to the wound of the Fifth Legion's entrenched estrangement from the Imperium, suggesting how little others took to understand the Kogorians. Though the White Scars were not executioners, like the Space Wolves, or World Eaters, like Engren's Berserk 12th Legion's warriors, or the perfect Astartes like Fulgrim's Emperor's children, the White Scars were what they were. They never demanded respect from anyone, and if the other legions knew nothing of them, then that was their loss, because the White Scars knew about them. The Fifth Legion was faster, they moved faster, and they killed faster. Secretly, the White Scars resented the outsiders' disregard greatly, and yet they refused to change their ways or Legion culture. Many Space Marine chapters have existed for millennia, with those of the first founding having their roots in the original legions, created to prosecute the conquest of the Emperor's Great Crusade. With history stretching back into the dawn of the Age of the Imperium, it is perhaps inevitable that chapters should come to blows, both metaphorically and at times literally. There are many instances of rivalries, and some of outright hostilities. The deep-rooted and mutual antagonism between the Space Wolves and the Dark Angels is well known, but there are many more examples. One example of such rivalry can be found in the case of the Raven Guard and the White Scars, who have harbored a mutual mistrust dating back centuries. In truth, there may be no single cause of the bad blood between the two present-day chapters, but the mere mention of several battles are sure to raise the ire of Raven Guard and White Scar alike. The assault on Hive May is one such conflict, as is the last march on the Sapphire Worlds. Most acrimonious of all is Operation Chronos, in which a venerated Raven Guard chaplain fell to enslaver domination in circumstances where a nearby White Scars force might have been able to intervene. The ill will created by these and numerous other incidents has led to the two chapters, even in the late 41st millennium, regarding one another with barely contained loathing, a situation that none can see an end to any time soon. A bolt of lightning in clear skies, a sudden gale from an unexpected quarter, the White Scars Legion was war's sudden and merciless slaughter. Swift action and a joy for the rush of combat and clash of blades were the hallmarks of its battles, tempered by a quiet and hidden wisdom that few took the time to uncover. The White Scars thrived in the chaotic heart of battle, anticipating its vicissitudes and flowing with them, always to be found where the foe was weakest, where they were least expected, and leaving only cold corpses in their wake. They were the Great Crusade's pathfinders, the bleak wind that ran ahead of its serried armies, culling the weak and harrying the strong that they might fall more easily to those who followed. There were many victories claimed by the Great Crusade that would not have been possible without the depredations caused by these warriors. The lightning-fast style of mobile warfare that had served Jaghatai Khan so well on the steppes of his homeworld proved to be equally effective on the many different battlefields of the Great Crusade. The White Scars soon became involved in some of the bloodiest battles of the time after the rediscovery of their Primarch. The White Scars most famously took part in the historic Alinor Crusade, the vast imperial assault on the Orc Empire of the overlord Alek Uruk. The White Scars and Ultramarine Space Marine legions, supported by the Imperial Army, the forces of the Mechanicum and the Collegia Titanica, took part in the massive Imperial campaign against the largest concentration of orcs yet encountered by the burgeoning Imperium of Men. In the aftermath of this monumental victory, the Great Khan watched with approval as Horus Lupercal, greatest of the Primarchs and most favored son of the Emperor, took up his new office as War Master of all the Imperium's military forces. The two of them, Horus and the Khan, liked one another. Of all his brothers, the Khan had only ever been close to two, and Horus was the first. Then they parted. The grand gathering of primarchs and commanders and battleships and officials at the triumph of Alinor dispersed, setting course for 1,000 destinations and making the warp light up with the trails of their passage. The Great Crusade commenced again, though this time, with a War Master at its apex, not an emperor. Just before the White Scars were sent on another campaign to continue prosecuting the Great Crusade, a great imperial conclave was called upon the world of Nicaea. This grand convocation, known to history as the Council of Nicaea, was called by the Emperor of Mankind himself, and was intended to determine whether or not the use of psychic powers represented a boon or a grave danger to both mankind and the nascent Imperium of men. There were three primarchs, who were primarily responsible for the creation of the Legions Astartes Librarius. Two were quite well known within the official historical records, Magnus of the Thousand Suns and the angelic Sanguinius of the Blood Angels. Though Magnus was the figurehead, the most powerful and the most vocal in support of the use of psychic abilities, he was not the only voice. His brother Sanguinius was more subtle in his support. On this, though, Jaghatai always argued the same way. The Kogan had drawn up most of the rules for and formalized the structure of the Legions Librarius, even though his name was never entered into the official data course. Jaghatai's contribution to the development of the Space Marines' psychic arts was never known by the other legions or the rest of the Imperium. The citizens of the Imperium at large were taught that humanity had moved beyond religion and superstition. They believed this inherent imperial truth, just as they were meant to. There were no gods, they were told, and what looked like magic was just the growing power of the human mind. The Kogorians, on the other hand, never stopped believing. They understood, perhaps better than anyone, that the warp could corrupt the finest. The greater the strength, the greater the corruption. On Kogoris, the ability to wield the power of the Psyker was called the test of heaven. The Kogorians had always known of the existence of the warp and the dangerous entities of chaos that lurked within. It was how their Stormseers had become so powerful. Their cousins, amongst the Space Wolves, the Rune Priests of Fenris, worked the same source for their elemental powers, though they would never openly admit it. The masses never learned about the warp, and the vast majority did not even know of its existence. The Emperor preferred to keep those truths hidden from the people of the Imperium, and for all anyone knew he had tried to stamp out those who still understood them. The Khan never agreed with this obfuscation of the truth, especially the Emperor's refusal to explain to his people the dangers of chaos, and father and son had often argued over the matter. This was the great question, the one they fell out over: can you rest an empire on a lie? The warp was not what the masses of humanity thought it was. It was alive and dangerous, and could be used. The Imperium was willfully blind, deliberately so. It had never wished to look at what held it together. In the beginning, Magnus had not wanted the Librarius integrated into the legions. He wanted every human psyker to unlock their full potential, to explore all they were safely capable of, with no restraint, and no guidance. But his two brother primarchs disagreed, for they felt that such potentially dangerous abilities needed to be curbed. So the Khan and the Angel agreed to create a strict structure for the use of psychic powers, a structure intended to limit what psykers were allowed to do. As already noted, on Kogoris the use of such esoteric abilities was known as walking the path of heaven. Psykers, the Zadian Aga, were taught that if they strayed from this path, the warp would eat away at their very souls. The Kogorians had always known that utilizing the powers of the warp was inherently dangerous. As the argument over the use of such abilities came to a head in the Imperium, there were those who understood that the survival of the Space Marine Legion's librarians was balanced on a narrow ledge. But there were those who thought that librarians were witches, ripe for burning, and those who thought they were still forming gods. Neither side could be allowed to win their arguments if the Imperium was to prosper. But in the end, the witch hunters largely carried the day. When the Crimson King spoke in favor of the use of psykers and even psychic sorcery at the Council of Nicaea, as many proponents feared, he went too far. He never understood how much fear he caused. If he had managed to rein himself in, and acknowledged that his legion needed to reform and that they understood that they needed to be more careful in their use of the warp, then the outcome of the council might have been very different. But instead, he preached about knowledge and power and gave the impression that he was some kind of prophet. Finally, at the end of the conclave, Stormseer Jaghatai Yasujai, at the time a junior librarian of the White Scars Legion, presented the Council of Nicaea a third option in regards to the use of psychic abilities and the maintenance or abolition of the established Legion's librarians. He explained that there was nothing inherently evil about a psyker. If such a gifted individual was properly trained in order to obtain the greatest results, like any weapon, he or she could still be used, but with respect and not indiscriminately. Yasujai argued that human psykers should be trained rigorously to take advantage of their innate abilities, in order to assist the Imperium in completing its galaxy-spanning conquest. With such an elite cadre of trained psychic specialists, utterly loyal to the Emperor, the galaxy could be brought into the Imperial fold with ease. Yasujai also argued that psychic sorcery should be strictly forbidden, since in dealing and bargaining with the entities of the warp, the ever-present risk of corruption was simply too great to be avoided. The Emperor's judgment at the Council of Nicaea proved severe, largely as a result of his anger at Magnus for delving into forbidden sorcery in contravention of the Emperor's explicit warnings to him decades before. The Emperor rejected the White Scars librarians' compromise. With the exceptions of navigators and astropaths, who were properly trained, controlled and sanctioned by the Imperium and were necessary to its continued existence, the Space Marine Legions were no longer to employ psykers within their ranks. He commanded that the Primarchs were to close their Legion's librarians' departments forthwith and not to indulge the undoubted psychic talents of those legionaries who possessed the gift. All existing Space Marine librarians were likewise forbidden to make use of their abilities. The Council's rulings also created a new position amongst the Space Marine Legions, the Space Marine Chaplain, to uphold the Imperial truth and help maintain the purity of an Astartes Legion's dedication and fidelity to the Emperor's commands. Afterwards, Jaghatai came to believe that the outcome of the Council of Nicaea should have never been left in the Crimson King's hands. The Khan should have been there, side by side with his two brothers, standing with the Angel and Magnus. No one could have accused him of being a sorcerer. It would have calmed the others to see a warrior Primarch making his case in support of the librarians. He did not attend because he was sent away to the Condex system, just as the council was preparing to meet at Nicaea. He spoke to Stormseer Yasujai and considered rejecting the Warmaster Horus' command to leave for Condex, for he could have done so, but both White Scars warriors believed that the campaign on Condex would be over in a matter of solar weeks. The enemy infesting that system were only greenskins, remnants of the Orc Empire, destroyed on Alinor, the last slivers of the warlord-elect Uruk's horde. Perhaps some of the Primarchs would have balked at being ordered to hunt down the Xenos. It was not prestigious work, but the Khan was happy enough. It was hunting, and in a way that he understood, cavalry charges across open spaces, going up against prey that had no concept of capitulation or self-pity. He had never complained. Nearly all of his legion went with him, ranked in their various brotherhoods, eager for the hunt. Scores of white starships cut the void, each crammed with warriors of the Ordu, all desperate to get back in the chase. This desire to hunt is best summarized by the Khan's own words, which is where I am today. It is not enough to take from an enemy their life, rather take from them also their places of safety, their allies, their homes, and their loved ones. Crush all those in their care, lay their chattels to waste, and then drive them alone and naked into the darkness. Take everything they have and burn it for the mere pleasure of seeing the ash crackle between your fingers and call it nothing more than a beginning. Because this world of YouTube is still new to us, please like this video and subscribe to this channel for part 2 of the life of the Great Khan. His actions in the Horus Heresy are a tale of their own and will be a complete broadcast in itself. Join us next week for this and stay faithful to our God Emperor. Guard the gates for the holiness of the Emperor.